This is another painting in the show. It's called I Help You, and it's a trompe-l'oeil painting of a bulletin board near where I live in Western Massachusetts. And it has, just business cards, ephemera from whoever had decided to post something there. And I live in the town where W.E.B. Du Bois is from, and it's, there's a Du Bois Center, so here was this kind of, you're invited to reflect on democracy. I will say that increasingly there's humor in my work. I think there's, in this case, it's, such a big topic that's represented by something so small. And I think that this relationship of like the small thing, the small ephemeral object that can kind of speak to something bigger, it's always at play in my work. And of course, this has art historical precedent as well with trompe-l'oeil, and I'll show a little bit of that later. Here's another example of kind of my, the humor and, the punniness of something like something that has weight and mass, but also it says mass, so it says what it is on it. My paintings, I guess it's fairly dry humor, but there's something very literal and that can have multiple meanings at once, double entendres, especially kind of language games. I'm also interested in that too. And above all, if something makes me laugh or something makes me feel something, when I encounter it in the world, I know that there's something there for it. So I try to pay attention to the moment that I have to give a double take, or I find myself kind of just, bending my neck to look at it as I drive by, or remembering it later, or it appearing in a dream. Something I call kind of like a hunch. And hunch is really central to my practice. Just noticing something, and in that moment of noticing, I think, maybe there's something there. I don't know, I should pay attention to it. It's a very small, very quiet voice that I try really hard to pay attention to. Really difficult to pay attention to things like that when you have so much responsibility in the world. Obviously, I'm a teacher, I'm a partner, I'm a daughter, I'm a citizen. There are ways that I do feel pulled towards doing things and speaking about things, but also, I guess art for me is a space of listening. So that's really, and being responsive, I suppose, in this correspondence with something else in the world. And painting is the best way for me to really look at it and get to know it. This is a hydrant in Joshua Tree in Southern California, and it was a very friendly hydrant. Also, funny to encounter, a hydrant in the desert, but also sad and tragic and scary about the effects of drought and development and those effects on the kind of environment. Because I do make paintings from life, so I'm there when I make paintings, right in front of the thing. I get a sense of the local environment through what it is that I paint. And I'll show you more pictures about that too. The sun was very strong, and I thought a lot about the way that this object kind of was bleached by the sun. It kind of absorbed the sun and the dryness of it. This is another painting I made in Joshua Tree. In this one, the kind of signifiers of development and real estate, kind of like boom and bust of this area came to the fore. I'm always really aware of my own presence in a place because I'm there temporarily usually, and I set up and make a painting and leave. I do have a relationship to tourism as well, and what my as anyone who travels to make art does. So what is my relationship to the place? And I saw this sign, and I liked it a lot because it was it really showed, the disappointment and failure of real estate in some way. The price had been revised, the terms of sale. It had once been hanging, and then not only did it fall down, but like it got run over. I mean, this was really, the bust of the boom and bust of real estate. And it also became its own kind of plot, in its shape. I was thinking about that as well. Here you can see kind of details of the painting. This body of work I make with, as I have been since I think about 2018, I make with acrylic gouache primarily. Has anyone ever used that? Okay, great. So it's like gouache, but it has an acrylic polymer in it, so it's not re-wettable. I mean, in theory, but it's very matte, and when I use it, it soaks into the ground that I make. I have some pictures of the ground that I make to prepare. It's not unlike fresco, so when I make a stroke, it stays there, and it stays put, and it's kind of, the painting becomes almost a recording device in the way that time is passing, and I'm, responding to what I'm looking at, mixing a color, noting it down, and then it stays in place. And that's why I use this kind of paint. In future work that I'll show you tonight, or rather in the presentation in the future, but of past work, you'll see oil paintings. This is a painting of this drill press. It was cool to see the metal shops here. My parents were and are metalsmiths. My dad was a blacksmith, and my mom is a sheet metal worker, so I grew up around tools like this. And this one I found more recently, but it's, it was used in the manufacturing of small, like, airplane parts. A lot of the subjects I paint, remember how I said I don't really go out in search of any theme, but I have noticed thematically what does appear. And there's a lot of obsolescence, in the things that I paint, or near obsolescence. Like, they're on the brink of vanishing, or on the brink of disappearing. And painting is a way for them to kind of exist and have some last gasp and some expression often. Sometimes I'm too late, but there is a sense of their liveliness which is transferred into the painting. For instance, these belts weren't turning when I painted it, but the way it appeared was almost in my imagination. I could see the ways that they had been moving and that they were functional. I do think about the life of objects, the kind of the expression that they might have. Like I said earlier, if they witness something, what have they seen? That's something I think about a lot, because when I make a painting, I am not the only being involved. There is more of an exchange. It really truly feels like that. So I'm interested in where kind of liveliness or life or spirit exists. And for me, it is occasionally in the physical world. Spending time with something and really looking closely shows me that. This is a smiley face that kind of literalizes that expression. And I've made paintings of faces that appear on things, whether they're intended to or not. This, of course, was the marking on a tree, and it's now faded, and the pink is not visible anymore. I made this painting about a year or a few months ago. So the pink is now gone, but it had freshly been marked to be cut down because the tree actually was dead. And I didn't know that the tree was dead until after the painting, and I looked up and there were no leaves or branches on it. So it was, deemed kind of hazardous, like it might fall over, so it was planned to be cut down. But it's still standing. So I did meet the person who marked it and who made the smiley face, and he told me that he definitely would not be cutting it down as a result, which was good, so I could finish the painting. Here you can see, this is the book that we made for this exhibition, and I wanted to share a little bit about the book in the context of the show. There's a foreword by Justine Kurland, who's a photographer, whose book I saw today in one of the studios. Justine really helped connect my work to my paintings to photography in this, in a kind of matrilineage in a way of the artist who I'm connected to. And then there's an essay, a very long essay by Jarrett Ernest, which chronicles the making of this painting, which is called Free Library. And this is one of those little libraries that I don't know if they're around here. Do any of you use these? Okay, yeah, they're really interesting. And because there's anonymity to it, and they're free, and I didn't know how heavily used this one was until I started painting it, but there are a lot of people who use it. And Jarrett Ernest, the writer, he was there from the very beginning of the painting until the very end with me every day as I made the painting, and he wrote about the whole process of it, and all the people we met, and all of the happenstance kind of events and conditions, whether it was weather. I got COVID during it. I was painting in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, which is near where I live, but it's where Norman Rockwell lived, so a lot about Rockwell. The Native American Mohican Munsee tribe who owns the land there, that became part of the painting. There's so much that goes into the experience of making a painting that is never really legible. So this is the first occasion where all of that has been made explicit and legible through his essay. And I thought I'd read you just a short passage from it. Here's another picture. I could paint knobs like that every day. I loved it. Okay, so here's Jarrett's essay. This is a section from it, and this is on May 25th. Josephine starts by painting animated, roughly vertical brushstrokes on the white roof, hitting only the sunny stretches with bright cobalt and cerulean, and in a few places a warm gray, mimicking the shape and freedom of the children's symbolic rain on the object, her strokes stopping where they dive under shadows. That will have to be continued with another color. We start talking about how important photography has been to her ideas, that when she was an undergraduate, she felt more at home with the photographers taking pictures of their families and communities than the painters shut away in their studios. Taking her camera out into the world, she thought, oh, this is similar to plein air painting. This is surprising. I always assumed her work was diametrically opposed to photographs, that her paintings were somehow a reproach to images. Putting aside purely synthetic digital images, photographs purport to show something that sat before a lens at a particular moment in particular lighting conditions, an appearance that is transposed onto photosensitive paper or film, creating evidence of what something looked like right then. That capacity to freeze frame life is photography's incredible affective power. Photography helps me understand the natural relationships that exist between myself, my technique, my subject, and the context in which we find ourselves. It choreographs it in a way that painting doesn't necessarily. Josephine explains, other things have something to say. Even though I'm the author of the painting, I don't feel that I'm the only force that's involved. My will is just part of the puzzle. I'm not just saying that, it really is the case. I did not choose these books. I did not choose that they get moved. I'm annoyed that Christian mythology is in a different place because now I have to deal with whether I use my own will to put it back in place or not, in a way that makes me feel like I have to confront my own agency and the power dynamic between me and the subject and who wins out. But that is what life feels like anyway. When I paint from life, it's my negotiation between will and chance, and I have a practice that allows for more chance than would happen in my own studio. Every morning when we arrive, the books have been rearranged with additions and removals, changes I announce to Josephine while she sets up her table, paints an easel. She's roughly filled in book shapes, but already some of those have disappeared. As though on cue, Vicky, who's the local librarian, walks over with a stack in her arms. Another Harry Potter, a teen novel called The Warriors, a nonfiction book about the NXIVM sex cult. She skips one. Fire and Fury, Josephine notices. That's about what's his name, Vicky says, and flashes the picture of Donald Trump on the cover. She shuffles them into the library shelves, then looks at the painting. Oh, wow, you've come a long way. Beautiful. So this is just to give you a sense of like the chronicle that Jarrett writes. And if you can download the full book on the internet, but you can also get a physical copy through the gallery. Also in the book is a section of my own photographs which document the paintings, and they're in Fujifilm Instax photos, wide. Does anyone use these? I'm curious. Does anyone do, Polaroids? Raise your hands. I'm curious. Yeah, okay, a few people. Well, I really love the wide format, and these I take when I am painting, but all along for many years I always take digital photos with my camera, or sometimes with a better camera. And I show them in lectures like this, but then I never exhibit them. So this show is the first time I exhibited photographs alongside my paintings. So I also wrote captions. Like on the left, for years I started finished a piece over the course of a day. Now I return to the same site repeatedly, painting in longhand. So this is also another kind of meaning of new hours. I'm kind of spending more hours painting in a way that is not about the accumulation of time or the quantification of time, but rather that my relationship to time is different through the material of the technique of painting that I'm using, as opposed to oil painting. There's painting on site like this is often assumed to be fairly leisurely, as plein air painting kind of came about in France in the late 19th century. But in reality, it's kind of today in America, it's quite difficult to do because it's in public, and this is a big part of my work. The paintings might not belie their struggle or the way that they come into being, but I do encounter a lot of people who are suspicious of what I'm doing or have expectations of what something should look like. For instance, in this painting, there was a local store owner who was really frustrated with me, thinking that I was blocking customers from going to his store, and yelled at me. And he was really having a bad day, and as he told me later on, after I finished the painting. Anyway, but I was so shaken by the experience that I actually didn't return until when his store was open, because I just didn't want to deal with him. So, there are things that are far, again, kind of outside my own control, my own will, and that's just part of the way I work. Other times I meet really nice people, it's quite social. This lovely person on the left, Ariana, brought me a bottle of cold water. It was a really hot day. On the right, Bill, who works for CSX, I was painting near the train tracks for the mass painting, and he was approaching me, and I thought, oh no, he's going to tell me to leave. I'm too close to the tracks, and I've been busted. And and he came over and he was like, can you take a photograph of me next to your painting? I'm really proud of this. And he said that he wanted to show his wife. And then he said also, please send me a high-res image when you're done, because I want to print it out and hang it in the CSX office. So, that was a really happy moment. But you never know with people in public, and that's part of the way that I work. It's adrenaline can kind of surge from time to time in this way of working. This is the install image of the photographs of those Polaroids that I showed you, or the instant photos. There were about 70 of them in the show. And I built this shelf that was on a kind of slight angle, and it's almost like a film strip. Ed Ruscha is an artist who's important to me, and he photographed kind of every building on the Sunset Strip, for instance, or, what's on the side of the road. These are, there's a relationship there. And here you can see there's a section that is per painting. And this is just a selection of them. All right, so that's the recent body of work. Now I'm going to share some of the themes that appear kind of in my practice. So one is time, cycles, and change. As I mentioned, I used to paint in a single day with oil painting. I would choose a subject. I'd have a canvas that was about the same size, and I'd make a painting almost like a long exposure. And in the last 6 or so years, I've been making paintings in this kind of additive fresco-like way. Those are the two primary modes that I've made paintings. I've thought about why why time is important in my relationship to daylight or seasonality, and I grew up here on Cape Cod. It's this peninsula of land just southeast of Boston. And it's where my mom grew up, and my grandmother and great-grandmother, and my dad grew up all the way near Boston. It's a very, which is not very far, but it felt like, worlds away when I was growing up. And on Cape Cod, which has a really nice, history of painters, for instance, this Milton Avery painting from 1958 of the ocean. But, one of the interesting things is a very tidal place. This is a picture of the town beach where I grew up, where the tide goes out several miles every 6 hours and then comes back. And the landscape changes dramatically based on the tides. And I think that combined with the changing seasons, I was always really attuned to the changes around me in nature and how they were cyclical as well. So that's just a part of what it feels like to be alive, I guess, for me, to be in relation to different places. I've lived in other countries and other parts of the world where there are other indicators of that kind of change, but I do trace this back to my own kind of inheritances from this particular place. An example of how this manifests in my painting is these are some oil paintings I made of this night window. This was a window in Rome, where in the studio I had at the French Academy, and it was difficult to make art in Rome. I was probably in my mid-30s at this point, very far away from where I grew up, but I was thinking about how do you paint a night, and so I was kind of like the hands of the clock became kind of the hands that I was of my own hand as I made the painting. And you can see that each one is a night. This one is from July 19th to 20th in 2015. This one is July 14th to 15th, 2015. And it was the same exact size as the window. Here you can see, I think there are 13 of them. And so this shows these different nights, one after another. And they're, I'm glad I made paintings this way. It was really athletic and, endurance, not just physically standing and painting, but like not looking away and having this really enduring way of looking at something closely for a long period of time at once. Here's another example of kind of change. This was a painting of my of a chalkboard in a room where I was teaching at the University of Tennessee, and this showed all the marks and the chalkboard over the course of the semester. These are my students' marks, my marks, and all the dust that kind of remained. Here's an example of an artist whose work I've often thought about, especially in relation to time, and that's Jennifer Bartlett's Air 24 Hours series. which she made in the early 90s, these large 7 by 7 foot paintings. Each one was an hour of her life. I mean, she took a while to make each painting, but it represented a specific hour of the day. And another artist I think a lot about is Don Clements, who is one of the most extraordinary chroniclers of time through painting, I think. And sadly, she passed away a few years ago, way too soon. But her painting of everyday objects, and on the right is like her medicine that she was taking as she was fighting cancer, but also just like everyday little stuff on the surface of the table. She made these paintings on these small pieces of paper and then would tile them together after the fact. This is a painting of mine of this peony bush, and which I was thinking of as a calendar. Each section was about a day, and there are 25 of them. And I made it over the course of about 6 weeks, I guess, as this peony bush bloomed and died. And so it was chronicling that. I started with the blooms and then moved on, and then towards the end I would move wherever the remaining kind of panels fit together. Here's a detail of it. You can see kind of how they fit together. And, you know, as I mentioned earlier, things changing and what's beyond my own will. This is an example where this is a painting I made pink stripe a very long time ago, maybe like 2009. And I made this painting of a window, and then while I was making it, I met the person who owned the building, who said, you know, basically, I've really got to repaint this. It looks so terrible. And I was like, no, it's fine. And then I came back a couple months later, and it had vinyl siding over it. So obviously, so the act of painting can kind of draw attention to something that maybe shouldn't have attention drawn to it. But there's, you know, things are always changing, I guess, is the lesson. And they're changing around me, and I have a practice that can kind of pay attention to that, even if it seems kind of mundane like this. All right, plein air photography and experience. Jarrett was getting to this in the excerpt I read you in the essay. But I found these are pictures of that's a picture of myself as a teenager, probably at age like 17. And then on the left is this brochure from workshops that I was kind of working for these artists who taught in this program, and it was in Provincetown, Massachusetts, this town kind of right on the end of Cape Cod. Again, this is where I grew up. And we were taught to paint like the color of the light and paint with a palette knife. And it was my first kind of real painting education that has stayed with me. And it was great. I loved it. But it was a very narrow definition of painting. And I remember when I was there, my palette fell into the sand, and my teacher was like, you know, you could go hang that at a gallery in New York and they'd call it art, you know. And I thought, yeah, actually that's kind of interesting. And later, after that, here I am. You can kind of see, you know, time passing, but you know, painting outside has been my kind of way. Later on, it's interesting, this is in the 90s, so like right around the same time, Laura Aguilar took this photograph of herself in Joshua Tree, you know, and kind of drawing correspondence between her own bodily form and the rocks around her. But when I was at college and I was studying photography, like Roy de Carava was one of my greatest, like first kind of artistic loves, because you know, he photographed just like everyday life around him in New York City, and I'd moved to New York to go to school at Cooper Union, and I was really taken with photography. And I started to realize that they're very similar, these ways of looking at things and finding correspondences in the world. These were my teachers, Andre Robbins and Max Becker. Max Becker was the son of Barrington Hillebecker, who made the kind of Neue Sacklichkeit photographs of big water tanks. Anyway, they found these houses which resembled each other all throughout the world in a kind of more ethnographic photography practice. I also was, an undergraduate when 9/11 happened, so these are photographs I took from the top of my apartment. And I think that witnessing and noticing things through photography and through being there made a very, really kind of set a course in me about the direction of my own work and art as a place of looking, of paying attention, of being present, of being embodied, of bearing witness as well, and of being, of communing kind of with the world around me. And I can trace that back to, to college. Later on, when I was, Catherine Murphy, I learned about her work when I went to Yale Norfolk in 2002. So I guess she just finished this painting. And she never came up again, like not through college or grad school, along with so many artists who really should have been named. But for me, she's a very important painter whose work is observational, like my own, although that term has never quite felt right to me, but I don't know what other term would be better. But she looks at things and paints them very carefully, and she's one of the artists I feel closest to artistically, today. Okay, scale and measurement. This is the next section. So it was 2014. I was living in France, and I noticed these, what are called a shell de creux. These are river flood markers, and I had always been in a kind of mode of as much as I was looking at something, I wasn't like Catherine Murphy. I wasn't interested in detail. I was interested in like an approximation or the feel of something, like kind of like impressionism. But then I thought, well, what if I just got really literal? What happens? What am I afraid of if something is just, it is a painting of the thing? Like what's so worrying? So I painted these exactly to scale, and I found that even when I did that in the most literal way possible, and this continued in those night window paintings. I made paintings of doors that were the size of doors and architectural fragments. There are many paintings in this period that I'm not showing you, but it was all just like it is what it is, and even when I did that, I found there was so much mystery, even in the most literal. So that was a big lesson, and scale played a big part of that. Right around that time, I was invited to make sculptures for Storm King Art Center, which is a sculpture park north of New York City. And I'd also I did everything I wanted to do as a painter, especially with those night window paintings. I was like, it's durational, it's a night or a day or whatever, this unit of time. The painting corresponds to the thing. It's everything I ever wanted to do. And I kind of felt like, well, I did it, and I don't really have anything else to do as an artist. The project came at the perfect moment, and I took about a year and a half out of my regular practice to start working on projects. And I will encourage graduate students to think about the distinction between practice and project for yourself. And a project is something literally you project into the future and you kind of imagine, what it will be, and then follow that plan. Whereas a practice, for me at least, I think is something that is more regular, and it doesn't necessarily guarantee results. Here you can see this is the making of this. This was called Yardstick. It was 36 feet long, and I wanted to make like tools that almost kind of calibrated your own relationship as a viewer to the environment, to the land, or to large sculpture. Can you measure a mountain, just based on your own, where you stand in relationship to it? I also think that, my work, it was fun to be like a little tongue-in-cheek and like measure, really big sculptures. For instance, this was right next to this big Richard Serra, and today Joe and I went and saw the Richard Serra, and it's always so impressive and serious, and I think measuring it right next to it was kind of fun to do. Similarly with this is opposite this big Barnett Newman sculpture. And this is a tree. I painted a tree 1-to-1 scale. And then on the back of it, it has this kind of arrow to indicate its length of 24 feet. I just visited this sculpture yesterday. It's been at the DeCordova Park in just west of Boston for the last 6 or 7 years, and unfortunately, it's going to be destroyed at the end of this month. So it's had about a decade of life. I'm really proud of it, but it's nostalgia. I'm like, I have feelings looking at these pictures because I love this sculpture. But it's wood, and it's, returning to nature. So measurement is something that appears in other artists' work. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Sylvia Plymouth-Mangold, but she's also a very important artist to me. She made these paintings of rulers on floors of her apartments in the 1970s. And here's an example. I think this is the first work I'm showing you, although I will show several, where I included a sculptural frame or surround that surround my painting. And in this surround, I screen printed these units of measurement and to indicate scale, like coins here that are to scale with like nickels, dimes, quarters, pennies, and rulers. And I also, you can see these little flecks of stuff. That's actually parts of the ground where I was standing that I ground up into the surround and sanded down like aggregate as kind of evidence of where I had been. And I had gotten into printmaking and done some editions that were really great. And actually it was, I think Carmen's here, but Adrian Gonzalez helped me figure out some screen printing things at Flying Horse in Orlando, and that was really helpful in getting to know in this body of work. So here I was drawing out ruler and then screen printing it with the paint that I was making it with. It was a really conceptual body of work. I made like dozens of these paintings, and they all have, and I was sanding for years, like kind of, screen printing and making the painting, and it was indexical, and I was kind of showing this evidence and the trace of it, and I have some other pictures I'll show you about that process. But these were all kind of related to calibrating a sense of understanding of the scale of the thing in front of you. Like, how do you know if it's really there? Okay, another theme is trespassing, boundaries, evidence, ground, and fresco. This is like a big section, but standing in a place, like, I'm always trespassing, no matter where I am. And the ground was really important to me. And I think that's, it's ground as material, but also as kind of boundary of ownership. I had moved to Western Massachusetts, where I kept encountering these signs of demarcating land and ownership, kind of legal notices. This was also during the first Trump presidency, when the contentiousness of kind of migration, mobility, ownership, land, citizenship. This was very much, on all of our minds. And, how do you kind of pass through a place? What does it mean to make art in relation to a place? What is my body in this place? What does it mean? And having lived in other countries and been fairly mobile and having a practice where I was kind of wandering a lot, this was the first time I really was able to think about it deeply by being in a place where even when I owned the land, it didn't quite feel like mine. So questions of belonging and site and create a great deal of meaning in my work, and I know in so many other people's as well. One earlier precedent of this is Robert Smithson. There's thinking about, his site and non-site. Like, you take this, the actual rocks from a place, you can document it, but then bring it into a museum. This installation, for instance, is at the Milwaukee Art Museum, and it's kind of a non-site because it's decontextualized. And so how do you what does it mean to take something from its original place and then bring it into another place? I think about that a lot with my practice. It's like I make a painting in a place, but then I leave it behind, and I have a lot of loss that kind of falls away. And so the photographs, for instance, in this recent show, or like the site material in the frames, this is a way of kind of contextualizing the painting wherever it travels. Anyway, it's something I think about a lot. This is a great example too, Alex Hayes' collection bag. He took like a handful of earth in southern Arizona where he lives, put it in this bag, zipped it up, and that's almost like a time capsule. You know, he whenever it's shown, it's opened up, and you can kind of see the grains of sand there. Here's a kind of shot of me working. This is a more involved setup than I typically have. I like to be a little lighter, you know, like I could pack up quickly, set up quickly, not leave a trace. But this is on my property in Western Mass, and so I was able to construct this bigger easel. You can see I've got like bug spray because, you know, I'm always dealing with mosquitoes. This is an example of some site material that I will collect, and that I was collecting at that time, grinding up, putting into the surface of the painting, and then sanding down. Here's that same painting you saw in the easel with its corresponding surrounding frame. And it's a panorama. I was looking down at the ground. That rock on the left is the same as the one on the right, so I was kind of rotating. And here's a detail of it where you can see the bits of rock, adjacent to the inset painting on the inside. I was, of course, thinking about the Boyle family ground pieces, which I had only seen in reproduction until, I don't know, a few years ago when they were shown in New York at Loring Augustine. Has anyone ever seen these or seen pictures of these? They're the most incredible thing. An entire family would work on this work for years, like parents, children, and they are really faithful one-to-one representations of like parts of the sidewalk. There are other examples of kind of groundwork that I think about, but this one in particular is really up there. And then, of course, the painting ground. I think when I was living in Rome and living in Italy, I for the first time I had a chance to look at frescoes up close, like not just far away on ceilings of churches, but during restorations, and looking at frescoes up close, this one being from Paestum in southern Italy, you can really see the intention of the artist, exactly where they were and where they meant to be. And when you make fresco, it's like you make this kind of lime and plaster wall, and when it's damp, still damp, not wet, but kind of damp, you take this mixture with pigment and you paint it, and when the wall dries, which is over the course of, about 12 hours or something, it cures the pigment into the wall, so it becomes one with the wall, the painting. It's not like on top of it, it's integral to the material. And I think for me, and by the way, what you can do in a day, it's called a giornata, a day, that is what you can do. And I realized then that I'd had this relationship to the day or to time, and it made sense, so much sense, that fresco is kind of a really important technique that I should think about. So I taught at Skowhegan. I learned how to make fresco. And here's some material tests. I was trying to adapt it into a practice where I didn't have to have a wall to paint on, like architecturally, because I was always making work on site. So these are some tests, and I figured out, it took about a year of trial and error, but I found a ground. I made a recipe, which is basically a traditional gesso recipe with paper pulp in it, but I can paint on it and it feels exactly like fresco. There's no body to the paint. It goes into the surface and immediately records what it is that the mark I make, and has that natural relationship to time. By the way, this is some early studies that I did with the help of an artist named Danny Levine, and she helped me figure out how to grind up, earth and put it into the ground as well. I also had a dog for the first time, so that's my dog's tennis ball. I think I was also just looking at the ground a lot with the dog. Anyway, so this was a very innovative period for me to kind of get back into painting after sculpture, after this very conceptual body of work with the ground and place and things. And that has led me back into still life. Like I'd kind of forgotten or taken a break from still life for a while. And also in Rome, though, I had spent time with this, which is this mosaic that I'd only seen at reproduction, and I was so excited about. By the way, everything in this mosaic, which is on the floor, it's called the unswept floor, stuff that's fallen to the floor, everything is one-to-one scale. So I didn't know that until I saw it in person. And, so still life was like, Chardin is, my favorite painter. This is at the Art Institute of Chicago. If anyone ever goes there, highly recommend looking at this painting. It's really, really amazing. The bread is just like squiggles, and it just feels so full of life to me, like Chardin just left the room. This is a very low-res image. I should replace it, but this is lowest odd. These are things that have kind of grounded me in still life, because to me still life is never still. It has a sense of being something is animated in it, and this is an example of like wind blowing a sheet. And and these are themes I think about, like the ephemera of daily life, the stuff that's left over, the kind of sense that someone just left the room but is there, their presence is embodied by the objects that are left behind. The atmosphere and the wind and light, kind of gives a sense of sharing time and space with something else in the world. And here's a painting of mine of this bucket that is, for a bulldozer, for excavation. And it's just it's a more recent painting that kind of, I think, fits into the genre of still life a bit more. Here's a patch of concrete that I made that is, a map of sorts, looking at the ground, finding where things are in relation to other things. Where am I in it, and where's this stick or that penny? It's kind of like a sense that, again, constant movement, as if you're navigating through something which is just right in front of you. Here's something more autobiographical. These hammers, which belong to my parents, trying to also kind of find them in these objects, their history, and therefore maybe mine. So that's, where did they come from? How were they used? These are things I think about when I'm looking at something. So that's still life. So I really kind of got back into still life, I'd say in like 2021. Trompe-l'oeil as a kind of subset of still life, meaning to fool the eye. But trompe-l'oeil, is interesting with this new kind of flatness of this technique that I was developing. I was able to paint things that were very flat in front of me, but also give the impression of space. And here you can see there's some examples where like the blue paint went over the brown and white paint, but there's also some areas where I'm kind of giving the illusion that, for instance, like here, where I paint on top of the blue with another color to give an illusion of it as being, what's on top, what's underneath. And this is very interesting to me, just technically, how things become kind of coherent as a surface and as an object. There's precedent in this that I think about. American trompe-l'oeil painting, William Harnett is one, John Pito is another. And much later, someone like Raymond Saunders, whose show I saw last year, which was really incredible. of like the trace of the artist. And here I was, this is something I noticed, this is of my moment. I put it here, I make a mark, and it kind of gets preserved and is to scale. Mitsuko Brooks, who makes, who does mail art, where she mails art to friends and then gets it back and makes these larger kind of reconstructions of all the postage and the traces of the journey that each of these pieces of mail art takes. This is also very inspiring to me. Martin Wong, an artist based in New York who made paintings of his environments, mainly like a domestic environment or his neighborhood, to tell stories about what it felt like to live in the East Village at the time that he was living and making these paintings. Here's a sculptural reference that was very significant to me, Rachel Whiteread's Holocaust Memorial, which is in Vienna, that when I lived in Vienna, as in my early 20s, this had just been installed, and it's the cast of the inside of a library where only those who were killed and perished are allowed to kind of, their spirits are allowed to kind of be inside, and for the rest of us to be outside to see only like the pages. And I think like symbolically and in terms of history, what surfaces mean, who can see them, what history they have and contain, these are all of great interest to me. That leads into, memento mori and memorialization. And I was, in 2019 to 2020, I was invited to make a body of work and exhibit it at the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum in Santa Fe in New Mexico. And O'Keeffe is really, very important to me. She dealt with this kind of still life subject that had inherently a kind of reminder of like mortality through painting skulls. And you can see this is my painting on the right. I was still working with the ground motif at that time. And by the way, with O'Keeffe, it was complicated to make paintings in that space because it was a museum and they had a story they wanted to tell. So that was challenging. Anyway, but what the work ended up being about was kind of like who gets remembered and who doesn't, and what kind of, what is the act of memorializing, because it's a museum dedicated to remembering O'Keeffe in many ways, and also one of the only institutions dedicated to remembering the life and work of a woman. So it was a very powerful experience, but also challenging to kind of experience my own sense of artistic identity too. I made this painting of my father's desk. My dad died from COVID. He was, he had Alzheimer's for many years before and went into a home during COVID because my mom couldn't take care of him on her own. And he, along with 20 other people, died from COVID in this home. It was like May of 2020. It was very traumatic. This was his desk that he left behind, and just as he'd left it. And I think that, and I was telling someone today, I didn't even think I would show this painting. It was too personal and emotional, but I'm really glad that I did. And it's made me reconsider my relationship to autobiography in some ways as well. These are some details of it. But this way of painting, this kind of way that the painting holds every brushstroke I make, it's almost like the painting can remember more than I can. And that's something I think about a lot, where I want it to, if I were to lose my memory, my painting would remember the experience of being there, what I noticed, that I was alive, that it was alive, that we had this kind of time together. So this is something that materially makes sense. So it's like, it's conceptual, but it's from my heart, but it's also, materially, it's really the material that kind of makes it possible. And that's what that's what art, I think can do is, bring all those things together. And this is the last painting I'll show you. This is another memorial, but this one is for someone I don't know. This was on the side of the road. And it's friends are the flowers in the garden of life. I don't know what that means, but if I really think about it, it gets more abstract, but I like it, and it's something to reflect on. And here you can see the kind of setup for it as well. I sometimes visit the places that I've painted before. This is in northern New Mexico, and recently I was traveling through there, and I got to visit it, and the many of the flowers are gone, but the plaque remains, and of course, it does in my painting as well. So thank you so much for listening. Happy to take questions. Yes.
So you used to do these paintings like this in a day, and now you're kind of working on them for like an extended period of time. How do you deal with kind of like the frustration of when the conditions are changing, the lighting's changing, the weather's changing, things are moving around without your control? What do you get like frustrated with that?
I mean, not really, because I like to roll with it. I like to see what happens. And there are times that, like, I will go to the trouble to carve out time from my life. Like, there's inevitably the most perfect painting days are always always the days that I'm teaching, and not only teaching, but like inside the entire day. I do get frustrated by that. But otherwise, when I'm out there, no matter what happens, it's like it's all meant to be. So I just kind of roll with it. And the paintings, these are taking usually from like 1 to 6 weeks. So not every single day, but most days whenever the weather can hold and I can be out there. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Joe. Yeah, I mean, I have ambitions to make I'll make a body of work in relation to this one place, but then it doesn't end up like that because of life, I guess. Maybe I should be more disciplined about like that kind of way of uniting them, but so far it's really kind of wherever I happen to be, and just kind of returning to the place and seeing where it leads. When I've worked in a more project-based way, like the O'Keeffe Museum body of work, or like the sculptures, or even on the ground, that has been thematically, organized as a project, as a whole. And I find that I'm not really at my best with that. I think I maybe start overthinking, or I worry about how to kind of round it out or illustrate it, accordingly. And so it's very helpful for me to have, if I have a show coming up or body of work, I really just kind of make paintings and then see what I've got at the end. And I want to be surprised. It's like if every painting is a word that I've kind of made up or found, then a show is like a sentence where all the words are strung together and they make a meaning that I could never have predicted. So yeah, I try to prioritize that a bit, but also just because that seems more fluid with life. Thank you. Yeah. Travel? That's a good point. I think when I was younger, I just wanted to leave home. I think I was just like, I got to get out of here. So I So that's probably where it started. I think 9/11 was another thing. I noticed, I can trace it back. I was like a little skittish, like always wanting to kind of get out somewhere, just in case, or have an escape route. Because I was so up close and personal to that. And then I think just a curiosity about other cultures and other places and people, and teaching. As I started teaching, I also started getting to know other people, but always kind of returning home. So, but I'd say that it's a mix of like personal kind of desire, inner kind of psychology. I love to get lost. I love to wander. If anyone's read Wanderlust by Rebecca Solnit, that's a book I really love. I love to get bored if I can, and I love driving. I love just like being on the road and just letting my thoughts wander. I think that it's really hard to have chance experiences in the world we live in because we're always in search of something through our phones. Like we can have what we want when we want and like curate our whole existence. And I think that my practice is a way of trying to be open to chance. And when I'm away from home, I have less control of that, and I have to figure it out. And I think that that's helpful to being curious and open to what might happen. And there is chance in that, and chance is like chance like boredom, two things really hard to come by today. So if I can kind of put myself in a situation where those are more likely, I get curious. I want to learn more. I want to be, you don't have to go far for this. You could just go to the library and just leave your phone in your studio or something and like see what books you encounter, and maybe just get curious, But how to do that where it doesn't feel like FOMO on the other end, it's really challenging, increasingly. And there's always something that's going to come up, like news flashes and messages and responsibilities and money and work and health and caretaking. And, it goes on and on and on. So, like, how do you make space to be curious amidst all of that? For me, travel does play a role. Like, sorry, family, I just can't be at Thanksgiving this year, I'm somewhere getting lost, but it's not, I love my family, but it's really hard to say no to the people and things in your life that are putting those demands on you. And as an artist, I think you have to find ways to shape your time and demand that. And travel is one, it's one of the last excuses you can have to not be available to the things that, that demand your time. Yeah.
On that travel note, you mentioned living in a lot of different countries. Can you say how that came to be?
Yeah, when I was 22, to 23, I lived in Vienna, Austria on a Fulbright fellowship. Highly recommend you all apply. If you haven't, talk to your faculty. I'm sure there's a Fulbright advisor here. And that's a fellowship where you can go to another country, and the premise of which is to create mutual understanding between the U.S. and another country. And it really is, many of you might not be Americans. You can also apply for a Fulbright in reverse to come to America. So it's something to think about as a way of getting to know another culture if you haven't already or you aren't currently doing that. And similarly, like in my late 20s, I moved to Paris for a year on a fellowship, and then I ended up staying there and returning there in my mid-30s. And then I had another fellowship to Rome. So that was really through these kind of fellowships that helped with visas and, not unlike kind of studying, but I'd already, schooled out myself, So just trying to find ways to not just visit another country, but really kind of go into it, learn the language, make friends there, and just get to know another culture. It's been really helpful. And it's been really helpful for me to understand who I am as an American as well. I mean, I think that's something like I really think of myself as an American artist. And I'm not talking about patriotism at all. I'm talking about sensibility and history and identity, but also what does it mean to have a French name, to relate to French art, whether it's Impressionism or the ready-made, or, there are these histories that uncannily kind of, are French, that end up being kind of mine as well. So, there have been times in my life where I've wondered whether I'm more French than American, but these are, in certain ways, but these are experiences I've only been able to really reflect on through really being immersed in another culture. And I'm glad I did them when I was younger. So if you're feeling like you are able-bodied and you have the means to try this, I recommend it. But it's very hard, and it's hard financially, it's hard, in terms of, it's hard politically, but it is a very valuable experience, and one that I'm not sure I'm up to doing now that I'm in my mid-40s. Yes?
Really interesting talk, and really interesting one. But my question is about, so you interact with your graduate students that you work with graduate students that you use, so is there an important experience and or thing you should get from graduate school and or learn? Because I ask this partly because Cooper is sort of notorious for providing such an excellent, rigorous education that it's hard for the Cooper students to find good graduate schools to go to.
Yeah, I mean, I went to Columbia University for my MFA, and that was also an interdisciplinary program. So in both undergrad and grad school, I never had to choose painting, and I think that's why, even though that is my language and my medium in some ways, my methodology is closer to, at times, photography or sculpture, for instance. But I guess graduate school, yeah, I've taught, and what's weird is I've taught in only MFA painting. I taught 6 years in MFA painting at Yale, and then 9 years at BU for MFA painting. So it's a discipline-specific program, and which is not how I really ideally think it should be. I think what you're doing here is amazing in terms of interdisciplinarity, because you have the resources to do it properly. Some programs just don't have the faculty or facilities or the student body to make it work, but I'm really impressed by how successfully it's being done here. But regardless, whether it's a discipline-specific program or multi or interdisciplinarity, that's the kind of, that shapes the curriculum. I think for graduate students, I'd say the most important thing is to make friends. I think it's really hard to share an experience today, truly, with people who come from different backgrounds than you. So to get to know, what's so amazing about graduate school is you don't have to make the work or live the life of your neighbor. They do it for you. But then you're so close with them that you understand how they're doing it. So it's like you have this exponential education. If there are 20 of you, you have 20 different ways of understanding how art can come into being. And I think that is really exceptional, because you also matriculate through these 4 semesters, or however long the program is, in proximity to each other, day in, day out. There's also vulnerability there. So, the kind of trust that you have to cultivate with your peers and with your faculty and random visitors like myself, it's really hard to do that. And that's why I'm so grateful to the graduate students who open up and share their work with me, because it takes a lot of courage to do. And I think when you're in a group where everyone has courage like that, it's easier to have courage, and it's easier to learn in that way. So I would say that's the most important, is just the kind of openness to difference, and to kind of the breadth of the difference of a cohort and faculty and visitors, but also the depth that you kind of at the same time drill down in your own work and sensibility and work through your interests with as little self-judgment as possible. I think one of the things that's the best thing about coming out of graduate school is learning how to give yourself permission to do the things you've always wanted to do, and try to not be so hard on yourself. Easier said than done. But like, you know, if you can feel like you have permission. I mean, it's hard to explain this here, and perhaps there are some people in the audience who understand, but like plein air painting as a contemporary practice is not, it's easier today than it's been in my lifetime, but like was so uncool. I mean, like, it was so uncool when I started doing this, and even before that, it was hard to even be a painter for a long time, and I know that there are painters here who know exactly what I mean and who went through this. And I'm not like trying to wave a flag for anything, but I did have to confront the embarrassment of my own sensibility in the kind of time in which I came up as a student. And by the time I'd lived in France after graduate school, I was like, you know what? This is just like what I love to do, and I just have to accept myself. And like I've run out of ways to kind of censor my own instincts. So the best thing I can do is just do it. And I will say that graduate school, which was quite a fight for me personally, and I hope it's not that way for all of you, but it was really a tough time to be doing the kinds of things that I wanted to do. And but regardless, the soul searching that happens in graduate school can be very challenging, even if no one is kind of making you feel bad about who you are. And I think that permission that comes about afterwards is something you've really got to continue cultivating way beyond graduate school. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, Jamie.
Wonderful talk there. And the work is tremendous. Thanks for sharing. I'm curious just about even this picture that you're showing. It's so picturesque. You have this boundless, like vista. It looks like a luminous painting, out with your shot or something. And yet here you are focusing on like the near space, an intimate kind of space, many, many times, and either memorial or remembrance or having a personal connection. I'm just curious about how you, and you've said that you've come to understand like your own proclivities, your own tendencies, the things that you gravitate toward, things like that. I'm just curious, what is it about the memorial, I guess, for you, whether it be very personal, like your father's? That was very touching to see that portrait.
Right.
But also, when you come upon something that's a memorial of, that you have no relationship to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Is there a difference between the two, or do you see a relationship between those impulses, I guess?
Yeah, that's well, two parts, kind of what I'm hearing is, one is like, also, why not paint the space around the thing? Why is it always so up close? And I can talk about that first. I think ultimately, like in my life, I will get to a point where that space becomes part of the painting in some way. I've noticed that I've started painting sky. Like, I didn't show the image that's on the poster, but that has one, and the trompe l'oeil. This has like the sky and this background. And I remember thinking, I can't believe I'm doing this. Like, this is sky. But I think that it's like, when I paint something, I want to be so close that I can smell it. I want to be so close I could touch it. And I want to be so close that I can hear it. Like if something is making a sound, I want to hear it. And I want to hear what it feels like when my brush touches the surface. It's a very soft, very faint sound, kind of like a hunch, like I was talking about earlier, the smallest thing that I can feel. And it might seem like, why pay attention to something that small? But that's where I'm kind of wondering if this thing is like alive or not. Like I'm like looking for a pulse or something. It's like I really have to pay close attention. And something in the distance is more of an illusion. Like, I remember standing on top of the World Trade Center looking down, and cars moved really slowly, or I've stood at like a cliff in the ocean where waves are crashing far away, and it looks like slow motion and you can't hear it. And that distance plays tricks on kind of what we notice. And so things that are up close for me, it's also a way of kind of almost in a sensory way verifying their activity or verifying their existence, because of being able to like touch it, smell it, hear it, see it. And that's, I think, what goes into the decisions I make when I paint. Because there are times where I'm like I just made this painting, finished it the other day, where it's wood as well, but it's a specific kind of wood that I'm like, how did I get that color? I have no idea, but it really is like, it is that wood. And it's not a trance state or something, but I'm paying attention to more than just the visuals of it. And that is informing my decisions with color, stroke, composition, everything. And that's why it's important. I guess the second question that you had was just so interesting, and I think that there's a reason why I placed these next to each other, that I have, my dad's desk, which is something so familiar to me, and then this memorial that I just saw once, and decided to set up and paint. I guess, I don't know, I get to be different people in different places. This is another kind of way of answering the travel question. Like, I feel like I am multiple, and I don't want to be defined by my own autobiography only. That is my lived experience. But there's something about seeing things and encountering things that are new to me, where I find myself in things that are unknown to me. Like, how can I exist in a memorial that was made by someone else for someone else? Why do I belong there? Why am I located in this thing? And I think about that a lot. Like, why do I feel a sense of belonging in things that shouldn't belong to me? And I think that is because I want to belong to things that are not only in my own experience. I want to be in dialogue with them, and I want to understand them, and I want to feel through them. So it's like I get to find out another part of who I am through these encounters with things that I don't have a relationship to. But and sometimes things that are more familiar to me are harder to paint because I have too much there. Like the painting of my dad's desk. I mean, I was so sick of this painting. I was just like, this was brutal. I mean, I was not enjoying it at all. I can't believe the response it's gotten. I almost didn't show it. I really think it's embarrassing. I thought it was too confessional. It was too private. I was exposing my father in many ways. He was a recovering alcoholic, and that's evident in here. He was at Alzheimer's, his health stuff. He drove a Toyota. It's like, you can see it all. It's just like everything. And but at the same time, that's, he was so dominant that I felt like I couldn't find myself in it. And it was only later, it's only with distance of time that I've kind of begun to appreciate this painting. Whereas something that's totally new to me, I don't have that kind of baggage. So it's a chance to be a new person, I guess, in some ways. Chance to be a different part of myself. So, that's interesting to me. And I know students today ask, like, is it okay if I paint something that doesn't belong to me? Like, is that allowable? Like, can I represent something that doesn't represent where I come from? And I guess my answer is kind of like, it's in how you do it that matters. It's not really that you're doing it, but like, how do you approach it? And how do you want to find yourself in that thing? And how do you allow for it to kind of reveal itself to you, where you're not telling it what you are? So anyway, those are just some things I think about. Thank you.
and sort of meld into the surface. So the picture is melding into the surface, but also the image as well. And how, when you spoke about the sort of physicality that is sort of transferred to you from that, like the brush and you want to smell it, is that something that you also want transferred to the viewer as well?
That's such a great question. Thank you. I feel like it is. It's like I hope for a chance encounter with my painting, in the same way, and that maybe is of interest, that there's life in this thing, in this object that can reveal itself, maybe. Like that Chardin painting at Chicago. What was interesting about that painting is I saw it this past February, but I hadn't seen it since 2006, so I guess that's 18 years later, and I'd always thought about it. And when I saw it again this year, I was really shocked that I saw not only the painting, and it had all kinds of new meaning for me, because in 18 years I have had lots of other kind of curiosities and interests and realizations and journeys and challenges and all the things that 18 years brings artistically and personally. So I was looking at it kind of differently and saw different things and was learning different lessons in it. But I also saw my former self there, and I was like, oh, hi. It was weird. It was like I was looking at the painting, but I was also looking at myself looking at the painting as a younger person, and it was really amazing. And I think that can happen with physical things in the world. It doesn't have to be art either. Like you could maybe go visit a relative's house, like a grandparent, and you see yourself being there with them, at an earlier point in your life. And or just, something random that you encounter. And I think it's that special sense of serendipity or coincidence, or like literally things coinciding, you in a place encountering something else, that can generate a feeling of uncanniness, or of deja vu, or of the sharpness of memory, of feeling. And so that's something that I think about a lot, in my paintings. And I hope that my painting could ideally someday maybe feel like that to someone else, that there could be a sense of curiosity or like liveliness or encounter that where someone could feel something. It's really hard to predict. Again, this is chance, so I hope for it, but you never know. And because sometimes even with my own work, I don't see it later and I think, oh, that's so special. I just think, oh yeah, that thing, that day. but it has potential for that, and I'm interested in that potential. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.